This episode is sponsored by The Power of You, a leadership resource for entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, and anyone intent on developing their leadership impact and supercharging their career. For more information, check the podcast webpage or show notes. Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. I am your host, Blaine Bartlett. I have been working in the field of leadership and leadership development for over 40 years. And when I got my start looking at this, it was through a very standardized lens. I think it would be one way to think about it. Leadership was thought of in the context of, Hannibal crossing the Alps. It kind of goes back that far. But command and control was a large part of it. Most leadership conversations were organized around hierarchy, who's the boss, those sorts of things. And the whole aphorism, or a number of aphorisms, one of which was don't let them see you sweat. All of those sorts of things were part and parcel of my at least initial education when it came to how do you develop leaders. And fast forward over 40 years, I've learned a whole bunch. And one of the major things I've learned is that model absolutely holds no water whatsoever today. We've got basically 5 different generations in the workforce today. First time that's ever happened in the history of mankind, as far as we know. So one size will not fit all. There's expectations. There's all kinds of different ways that people kind of organize their thinking and their behavior around what's oftentimes looked at as goals and objectives and strategic initiatives, those sorts of things. My guest today, and I'm very excited about having him on the show here. When the invitation came across my desk to have him on the show, I did a little bit of background exploration because I kind of like to know who I'm talking to. He sees himself as, not even, sees himself. He literally is the purpose-driven leader. Randy Lyman has actually shepherded, he's an entrepreneur, a number of 8-figure businesses, successfully built them and exited. And he's got a book out that was released in March of 2025, March of this year, called The Third Element. And we're going to be talking about what that third element is, because it's very much in the wheelhouse that I'm working with right now around what makes a leader effective. And that has to do with the recognition that everything fundamentally comes down to relationship. And relationships are steeped in emotion. There's the old organizational development joke about, leaders, the executive team went away to, created the perfect organization and they screwed it up when they put people in it. And the reason they get screwed up is because people are squirrely. They get their feelings hurt. There's emotional, diagrams that come into, or diagrams, emotional movement that comes into play here. Oftentimes underwater, you don't really know what is causing it, but all behavior is emotionally directed in some way, shape, or form. And if we're not paying attention to that as leaders, we're going to be dead in the water, literally, in terms of being able to move things forward effectively with any kind of sustainability. So Randy Lyman, the purpose-driven leader, we're going to be talking about his book, The Third Element, but more importantly, I think we're going to be unbundling this whole notion of what is emotional intelligence and why is it a superpower? So Randy, welcome to the show.
Hello, Blaine. Good to be here.
It's good to have you here. Coming in from, we were talking before we went live with this, from Sedona, just a beautiful Sedona, Arizona, gorgeous spot. And what, like I mentioned, you have founded and shepherded and exited a number of very successful businesses in your career. And in that process, there had to have been a learning curve that has generated this book.
Yeah.
So let's just kind of back up a little bit here. First of all, I'm just going to ask, what is the third element, and how has it played a role in creating and sustaining your success in the businesses that you've actually created and led?
Well, everything in the universe fits into one of 3 categories. It's either, not in any particular order, it's either mental, thought, and information, our physical body in the physical world, or our emotions. And so if you go back 35 years ago, I was successful in business, but I was doing everything I could to be educated and to work hard and in order to find success. And I found success, but it was limited. And eventually I got in my own way because I was avoiding the emotional side of being human. I met a woman when I was working in one of my service shops, filling in for a service manager, like I say, in November 1989. And I spent 3 years with Maria, and she introduced me to the unseen part of the human experience, the spiritual, emotional part of who we are here as spiritual beings on a human path. And as I cleared out my own emotional baggage and I started to experiment with what I was learning in different parts of my business to show up differently and to interact with people differently, I found huge success. It was really crazy and a big surprise for me, but the rewards were wonderful and it changed my life.
That emotional baggage, that emotional disconnection and stress, I mean, it's present with every one of us in some way, shape, or form. But the challenge is in recognizing it, number one, and then actually leveraging it, number two. And it's not so much the recognizing, but the leveraging, yeah, in a visible way that requires vulnerability, which for many leaders is almost an anathema, position for them to take. Yeah, and I go back to the old adage: "Don't let them see you sweat." Um, in the work that you do, because you've got a corporate consulting business and coaching business, executive coaching, how do you work with your leaders, the clients that are your leaders, or the leaders that are your clients more specifically here, to actually get them comfortable enough to actually become vulnerable enough to do that exploration?
I have to show up calm and confident and authentic and put my ego aside. I have to share my own failures. I have to share my own stories and challenges and what I went through to develop what I developed. I was in a place where I worked for myself and I took risks. And when I first started to become vulnerable and ask for help from my teams and such, I was afraid that I would lose their respect and everything would fall apart. But I took the
Mhm.
risk anyway. And a lot of people are not in a place where they can take that risk. So when I show up and I can share my stories, I can give them some guidance and show them how to experiment, then they can learn how to do this without failure. And that was my biggest concern. But at the same time, a part of me knew if I continued on the way I was 35 or 40 years ago, all left brain, pushed my way through everything, I was eventually going to fail anyway. And
Yeah.
that's what I bring to people is my experience, my stories, and some real solid techniques and behaviors and changes they can make that are effective and show them how to kind of just dip their toe in the water and get a feel for it before they jump in completely.
You know, and then this is one of those things that's easier said than done. I've got a hunch, just based on my own coaching experience with executives I work with. Um, if I'm a leader running a corporation or a team or a mid-sized company, uh, what would you suggest would be one way that I could start using mastery of emotions, emotional mastery, to help help us be more efficient and effective? And I'm less concerned with efficiency and more concerned with effectiveness in that question.
Well, the first part is discover. We have to be aware of who we are and how we react to the world and such. And a business leader is typically a left brain list maker. So we start with making lists.
Yeah.
And where is the problem? So I do three columns. First of all, what is the physical world problem? And then what solutions do we see that are possible? And then the third column, which is more important and most important to me, is what feelings come up around this frustration, disappointment, whatever they might be. And then we dive into that. So uh, yeah, we have physical problems in the real world that we need to deal with solutions and systems and equipment and training and boundaries and all those things. But what's more important is what are the underlying feelings? So once a leader can understand, yeah, there is an emotional component to me and how I am interacting with my team and the world, then we can dive into that. But leaders, first of all, have to be two things. They have to be curious and they have to be interested in something deeper than what they've experienced in the past. So if that curiosity allows them to go deeper and they're willing to look at themselves, then I guide them through that in a way that's safe, that's easy, it's outside of work, and they can find out more about themselves without risking being vulnerable before they're ready to be vulnerable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, I love that last piece here. You kind of pace and lead with this. Yeah, and you have to take an old neurolinguistic framing here. Um, I remember doing some work with IBM years ago. This is back in the 1970s, and I was talking about feelings and emotions. And this was a group of double E electrical engineers at IBM, and I literally had one guy who went he hold up his hand and says, "Do you mind if we define that?" And he got out, he went to the bookshelf. We happened to be working in a room where there was a bookshelf, and he pulled out a dictionary. He wanted to know what the definition of a feeling was. And it was like, it reminded me of The Dubliner, James Joyce's novel, which nobody wants to read. It's just a thick tome. But it begins with this line: Mr. Duffy lived a short distance from his body.
Well, that was me. That I lived in my mind. I lived in the physical world. I'm going to force my way through all masculine energy, no intuition, no personal interaction, no caring, and that's who I was. And that's the way the world was back in the 1960s and 70s and 80s when I grew up. But we're anybody, any leader over time who could connect with people on a level where the people they led felt comfortable and safe and knew that leader was supporting them, that leader is effective. And that's
Mm-hmm.
really what it comes down to. I'll jump into, I'm a physicist by education, so I'll jump into the definition of power. The definition of power is the ability to get work done. Well, if I'm a leader, that means I'm not doing the work by myself. I have a team. And what makes me most effective as a leader is when I get the most work done by my team. And the way to get the most work done by my team is for my team to want to do the work, for my team to feel appreciated, to feel like they're contributing and feel like they belong. And so those are all feelings. And I don't make decisions based on emotion, but I'm very aware of my emotion. I'm very aware of other people's emotions. And I want people to feel emotionally safe when I show up as a leader, which means I have to get my own tensions, my own worries, my own anger and frustration out of the way. Or when I walk in the room, they feel it, they close up, and we don't accomplish anything. So it's multiple steps to get to that point. It is an investment in time, but the investment is so worth it.
I use a metaphor in the work that I do, both training and the actual coaching work, of a bow wake. And I'm struck by the fact that you are a physicist, so you're familiar with this. But there's resonance, your frequency, and people have energy, and there's an energy field. I live in a field of energy, and I'm always continuously moving through that field of energy. And if you think of a boat moving through the water, what precedes the boat moving through the water is that bow wake, and it's a measure of the resistance that the boat is creating as it moves through the water. The larger the bow wake, typically the greater the resistance. If I equate that to emotional energy, which often, I think is a pretty good metaphor. You got emotional energy moving through before you ever open your mouth. You enter the room, and I'm struck by what you said at the beginning. When you are working with your clients, you get yourself settled first before you start engaging with them. That kind of awareness is a difficult thing for, I think, a lot of leaders to actually, number one, understand, number two, grasp, and number three, leverage effectively. If they can understand the metaphor, but how do they begin to tap into, there's an emotional energy that precedes anything and everything that they're doing.
I agree 100% with what you just said. There are all those challenges. But for me, the biggest challenge was once I opened Pandora's box of emotions, I had a lot of painful emotions I had to deal with.
Yeah.
So I was actually shutting off joy and love and happy anticipation and deeper personal interactions because I was trying to avoid my anger, my disappointment, my fear of being alone. And so in order to open up that box, that was the hardest part because I was so afraid of what was going to come through. And what came through hurt. There was emotions, there was a frustration and things I had to go through. And as a grown man, I felt that. I cried tears. I worked through a lot of things with EFT tapping, with yoga, with a lot of other things. But once I opened that box and I started down that road, then I felt the support of the universe and I felt every time I had an emotional clearing and I worked through the old painful energy, then my life got easier and things got better. But I think that's one of the reasons that people avoid looking at their emotions, is because they know there's going to be some pain involved.
Yeah. Yeah. I can certainly recognize that just in my own journey. It's, yeah, yeah, it's kind of like there'd be dragons beyond that shoreline, sort of a thing.
Well, there are. And so all of us, especially men growing up
Yeah.
as boys and young men, and we go through junior high and we go through high school, if we show any feminine traits of intuition or caring or being considerate, other boys, the other young men, they verbally and sometimes physically beat the crap out of us because they don't want to be vulnerable. They don't want to see it. They grow up believing, and we all grow up believing we have to be macho because we're men. Well, yeah, we're men and we have particular traits that women don't necessarily have as much in the way of being protectors and providers and being physically tough. But as we get out of high school and we get through college and we get out in the workplace, we don't need to be macho anymore to accomplish what we need to accomplish. Yes, we need to think positive and creatively problem solve, and we need to take action. And those are more masculine traits, and we need to hang on to those. But at the same time, when we interact with people, interacting with people from a place of just masculine traits is not as effective as interacting from a place of caring and concern and acknowledging who is the spirit that I'm interacting with? What is important to them in their life? What
Hmm.
dreams and goals do they have? And what concerns do they have for themselves and their family? And how do I help them feel that myself as a leader, I'm going to help them succeed? And when I have that connection with people, they're on my side because they know I'm on their side. And that's not a natural progression. That's not something that we as men have many good examples of and can learn how to do. So some of us stumble across things that work and we grow into that. And now people like yourself and me, we're in a place where we can help others find a different way to show up.
Yeah. What you begin to address there is, for me at least, the distinction between motivation and inspiration. And in my experience, and I'm going to just check this out with you as well, but the leaders that are actually in touch with and can actually work with the emotional dynamic of relationship are far more inspirational than they are
Every single
motivational.
time.
Yep.
Absolutely every time.
Yeah.
Because they want to succeed themselves. They show up to work, and if they feel fear, they feel their leader's angry, upset, or guarded, and they're going to show up guarded. They're not going to take risks. They're not going to be the best they can be. They're not going to participate with their ideas. And now we have to have the right team. You can't
Yep.
have a crappy team and do this and have it be effective. We have to have people who want to succeed. We have to have people who really care. But when we put together those kind of teams, and then we show up differently, and we show up helping them all learn how to work together, then it's effective. Now, we still, as leaders, have to teach them how to make decisions, like a 4-step process for decision making and effective project management and things like that. And that's also an investment. But when we invest in the training and when we invest in listening and learning more about the people that we're working with, and we teach them how to make decisions and how to be part of the creative problem solving process, part of the planning, etc., then suddenly we have a team that's 2 or 3 times more effective. And that might seem like an exaggeration, but I can tell you from my experience, it's not. When the right people feel appreciated for who they are, they feel like they're contributing, and they feel like they belong, now they become leaders and they take charge and they show up in a way that's completely different, in a way that they want to be there and they're excited about work. And I was surprised when I first walked into a room and I found people solving problems without me being there. I thought, holy crap, this is
How can
great.
yeah. I must hasten after them, for I am their leader.
Well, that would have been me 40 years ago, and I would have screwed it all up. And I did many times, but I learned by my mistakes and by my risks.
Yeah, yeah, I'm loving this conversation, and I'm interested in the book. I'm sure you've got a number, and I haven't. And I'll just acknowledge this: I haven't had an opportunity to read the galley or read the book itself. But what is one emotional practice or tool that you believe every leader could implement immediately or should implement immediately in order to see some tangible results? Because you mentioned you've seen results as a consequence of this.
Well, listening. As a leader, we need to learn to listen, and not just listen so then we can speak again, but put our thoughts aside. If we have to write down our ideas on a piece of paper, nobody cares as long as we're listening to them. And then create a pause, a pregnant pause after they're finished. And if you need to, ask them anything else you want to share. And most of the time, people have more they want to share.
Yeah.
And we have to be willing to invest the time to listen and pay attention and be open-minded. And even if we don't agree with people's ideas and solutions, this is something I found when I started working with groups and teaching them how to solve problems. Their solution might only be 60% as effective as my solution. But when they own that solution 100%, now if they're having challenges, I can always go in and ask them questions. I'm never going to make statements. I'm going to ask questions, ask them if they want any help, ask, have you considered this? And I can guide them to success. And then when they reach success, I can praise them for that success, and they can truly take ownership of that success. That's a completely different dynamic, is when they own the solution and I can give them credit for the solution, and then they find strength and confidence in themselves. And so it's just it's a completely different process, but it's so much more effective.
It absolutely is. And, in one of the leadership models that we work with, communication is one of the foundational components to it, which is not surprising. Most people, when they at least begin to first blush, think about communication. They're thinking about, what's the message I'm delivering? What's the message that's being delivered? And they miss, I think, what 80% of communication actually is, effective communication, which is listening. 80%, and in my experience, 80% of effective communication comes down to my ability to listen well. Excuse me, just one moment. Well, I will edit that out. I'm just getting over a bit of a cold here. There we go. So back, edit. In my experience, people miss a good chunk of what communication actually is, which is listening. And listening is an art, in my experience. It's not, people think it's just about hearing, but hearing and listening are two very different things. And I really do believe that there's an emotional dynamic inherent in highly effective listening. Can you address that a little bit in your experience? How do you kind of frame that?
Those two major components that I see. First of all, is people have to be able to empty out all their thoughts, all their feelings. They have to feel like they've been heard. And once they feel like we've heard them, then they're ready to listen to us. But also, if they can't feel that we care, they're not going to listen to us. So we have to genuinely care. And then for me, early on, that was a stretch because I was so in my head pushing forward. But when I slowed down and I understood I was dealing with people at a deeper level, then I found a way to actually care because I learned something about them. I listened, I learned about them, I started to understand them a little better, and I realized it's not that they don't want to succeed, they just don't know how, and it's my job to help them succeed. So I listened, I learned about them, they could feel I cared, they were able to empty, and then once they were able to express themselves and be heard, they heard pretty much everything I had to say, but I had to be patient, and I'm not a patient person even today. Also, I want to say I'm not an emotional person. I didn't write this book about how to work with our emotions because I want the world to be emotional. It's because I can't change the world. And I've learned and gained so much by taking this approach. I'm still an action first, then think kind of guy. In business, I try and plan first before I take action, but that's how I'm wired. Emotions last. But I didn't do this because I want to make decisions based on emotions. I don't. It's not because I want to show up as a sobbing emotional mess. I don't. It's because I want people to hear me and to understand, and I want to hear and understand them. And then together we accomplish so much more.
That I really like and appreciate that answer, Randy. And to the point of three elements. We are emotional beings, and if we don't allow ourselves and allow our people to bring all of who they are, which includes the emotional body, to what it is that they're doing, we are literally, cutting off 30% of 33% of that human being, and they're not going to be functioning as effectively as they could. I mean, if I had 33% of me missing, I would not be, working particularly well. Um, there's a myth about emotions and success that I think is present, almost pervasively so in businesses. What would be one of those myths? And I think you write about this in your book. What would be one of those myths that you think would absolutely need to be blown out of the water?
If we are vulnerable, people will not respect us. The irony is when I show up calm and centered and confident in who I am, as a leader who knows I'm going to be effective to help the group, not confident in my title, not confident
Mm-hmm.
in my position of authority, but confident that I can take this group to success. Then I'm calm and I know I can be vulnerable. And when people say, holy shit, Randy is being authentic and vulnerable and he's still confident. Wow, this guy must really have something going on. I
Yeah.
feel safe. And his peers so strong because he's willing to be authentic and vulnerable. It really takes people to a whole nother place where they see us with more respect. And I didn't believe that 35 years ago, but today I've experienced it so many times when I'm calm and I'm admitting my mistakes and I'm asking for help, then people really respect that.
Yeah. Just out of curiosity, what is a practice that you engage in on a regular basis that allows you to, keep yourself centered when all about you are losing their mind?
Well, I've built a lot of faith over the years because
Uh,
I've had so many experiences, but EFT tapping is something
yep.
that's been really effective for me.
Yep.
And I actually, in the book, I'll make a plug for the book now, in the
There you
moment.
go.
In the book, The Third Element, in the appendix, I actually the entire appendix is about EFT tapping and how people can
Hmm.
write their own tapping exercises. And this works through the brain, it works through the body, and it works through emotions. It's based on Chinese acupuncture and acupressure. So I'm a big believer in that. I do
Yep.
breathing exercises, and I don't care whose breathing exercises you do. Anytime we slow down and take a breath and we're aware of it, it brings us into our body in the present moment. Our mind is never in the present moment, and our mind cannot heal our emotions. They can only be felt through our body. So I do EFT tapping. I do breathing exercises. I do a lot of journaling and list writing, and sometimes I just scribble shit out on a piece of paper, and it helps me be more in the moment. And I sit down and still do my left brain goals and lists. But
Yeah.
those simple things that I do are really effective because they slow us down and they get us into the moment. And in chapter 7, I have 14 different exercises or modalities people can use to become more centered and present and to deal with their emotional baggage. And one other thing I like to recommend is if I'm going into a board meeting and I have frustration because there's somebody on that board that I have issues with, then I stop and I write down my challenges and I become aware of them so they don't bleed out into the meeting. I'm aware of them
Mhm.
and I can set them aside for the moment and I can work through them later. This isn't about always being emotional. This isn't about always turning off our emotions. This is about knowing when and how to work through our emotions in a way that we can be more effective with our thoughts, our communications, and our actions.
I love, yeah, but basically what you're talking about is regulating your bowel wake. my
Yes,
language for it. Uh, and yeah, I like the way that you frame that because it's most people will think it's emotions have got an on off switch. They no, they're governed by a rheostat. And the more familiar I become, I can dial it forward, dial it back. What's appropriate? What's too much? What's too little? I don't want to just close it off.
beautiful explanation.
So yeah, they're useful. It's energy. Energy moves things. Nothing moves without energy. And
And they're the strongest motivator that there is for us. And we don't want to be motivated by our negative emotions. I was for many years. And that's
yeah,
part of being younger is when we're young, we have emotional wounding that drives us to success. And then we get to a place where those wounds no longer drive us forward. They hold us back. And then as uh, in our late 20s, 30s, whenever that might be, maybe in our 50s, we get to a place where I say, holy cow, I want to work through this in a different way.
yeah,
And then we are more personally inspired, and we are a word you used earlier, which I agree with. And then we're also in a place where we can inspire others rather than forcing through motivation. And inspiration is always stronger and more effective. So it's just an evolution. As
Yeah.
human beings, we start out knowing nothing. We learn what we learn. We learn some things that are wrong along the way, and we learn to correct when we get a little older and a little wiser. And that's the beauty of the human experience, is we always have an opportunity to learn something new.
I love it. I love it. Randy, hold your book up again, if you wouldn't mind. There we go. Shameless plug here. The Third Element, Randy Lyman. Folks, I want you to pick the book up. And I'm going to just authentically here speaking, I have not read it yet. I am getting a copy of it. I love what the premise is. And I think you would be very well served to pick up a copy yourself. Where can people find out more about? I'm assuming they can get the book at the regular place.
Let's just say some platforms will let us say major booksellers. And then through my website, randylyman.com, they can have access to buying the book. I recommend other books. I have some free tapping exercises and some free helpful videos there. And they can follow me online through links there and become part of our community. So I'm here. I came out of retirement to do this. I don't need to work. I did this because what I've learned has made my life so much better. And I just want everybody to understand we can take charge of our life. We can create a better life, and we can help others find their way to peace and happiness and financial success.
And financial success. Yeah. It's the whole pie. We can have it all. If we're aware. Yeah, you got to.
If we're aware. So first it's education, and that's being willing to dive into our own healing journey and exploring that. And in the book, I share a lot of my story so people understand, wow, this guy who's a scientist and a mechanical engineer with multiple patents and has run businesses, this guy who's solid in the left brain world has embraced the emotional side of being human and found so much success and peace. And that's what I want people to experience. We're here to have challenges and learn, but we're also here to have happiness and joy in our life. And connect on a deeper level with our family, our friends, and the people we work with.
Randy Lyman, thank you for being such a great guest. I've loved this conversation, and unfortunately, we're going to be bringing it to a bit of a close here. Again, randylyman.com. Get a copy of the book. You're going to be loving what you find in there, The Third Element. I've used NFT for years. It is a very effective modality. So, folks, take advantage of the offer here. See what you can do to improve your emotional game. You'll be very well rewarded. You've been listening to The Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. And as we sign off, my admonition, as it always is, pay attention to nature. And if you look at nature, you're going to see that there's nothing in nature that serves as a center of accumulation. Everything in nature serves as a center of distribution in some way, shape, or form. Find a way to distribute in your life. Give something away. It will come back to you in many, many ways, some of them really unexpected. But serve as a center of distribution in your life. You'll find that life works a whole lot better. Until next time, thank you for listening. And Randy, thank you for being such a great guest.
You're welcome. It's great being on your show, Blaine. Thank you.
This episode is sponsored by The Power of You, a leadership resource for entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, and anyone intent on developing their leadership impact and supercharging their career. For more information, check the podcast webpage or show notes. Hi, I'd like to ask you to do something for me if you wouldn't mind. If you like this episode, I'd like you to not only subscribe on your favorite site, but I'd also like you to give a rating. Ideally, a 5-star rating would be greatly appreciated. But I think more importantly also would be just some comments. That helps with the algorithm and it helps build the audience with this. And more than anything else, if you could invite somebody else to listen, just share this episode with a friend, with a colleague. And I'd like to see how we can grow the soul of business. I think it makes a difference. Thanks.